I want to talk about a topic I've wanted to get into for a while. This is a video I've been meaning to make, and right now I'm about to sit down and record a response to somebody who had some comments on my videos about the Snow White remake. This is only tangentially related to that, but that person essentially wanted to have a conversation about traditionalism versus progress and all that. And that prompted me to think that I've got a video topic I've wanted to make for a while, talking about what I think is one of the most insidious thought-terminating cliches. A thought-terminating cliche is a statement, a simple, pithy statement, or seemingly pithy statement, that is uttered in response to somebody who is doing an in-depth analysis of something. It sounds like it's a reasonable response on the surface, but it actually has no real bearing on what was being said. All it's intended to do is derail the person's train of thought and reshift the topic of discussion into putting the person in question on the defensive. In this case, the thought-terminating cliche I'm referring to is, don't you want to be on the right side of history? That phrase gets bandied about a lot. And here's the thing, no matter what you believe politically, whether you are progressive, conservative, moderate, something else, your answer to the question, don't you want to be on the right side of history, should always be no. Because no one knows what the right side of history is going to be. And just because things seem to be going well after implementing some idea or concept you were in favor of, does not mean that you're on the right side of history, because history is constantly being written. So, what is important is that you know what you believe and that you're strong in your beliefs. Now, that doesn't mean that you're unwilling to change when better ideas come along. But as I forget who it was who said, don't have the strength of your convictions, have the strength to change your convictions if better convictions come along. But that's not the same thing as wanting to be on the right side of history. The depth of that argument essentially amounts to saying, well, despite everything you just said about what you believe, can you be peer pressured into changing your belief? Aren't you worried about the fact that you're going to die with more people disagreeing with you than that agreed with you? The answer is no. If you have any dignity and self-respect, you should not be changing your beliefs so that you can die knowing you were one of the popular kids. A perfect example of the fallacy of thinking that you are on the right side of history came in the form of the concept of eugenics, which really caught on in public intellectual circles a little over 100 years ago. It was, at the time, eugenics, if you don't know, is the practice of controlled breeding among human beings to produce positive traits and to encourage the reproduction of positive traits and discourage the passing on of negative traits. And at the time, the public intellectuals out there were just in love with eugenics. They thought that it made all the sense in the world, it looked great on paper. And one of the few people to stand up and oppose them in public intellectual circles was G.K. Chesterton, the Christian writer. And he was outspoken against eugenics because he said it was a violation of human rights, that it was an affront to individual rights, to the autonomy of the individual, the dignity of the individual, and predicted that it would have very disastrous results. At the time, he was widely pilloried as being old-fashioned, out of touch with the modern world, a reactionary, etc., etc., etc. Then a little thing called World War II happened. And the Nazis in Germany, the Imperial Army in Japan, or the Imperial government rather in Japan, implemented eugenics policies that resulted in some of the greatest human rights violations in the history of our species. G.K. Chesterton was vindicated, and it is a tragedy that it had to get to that point before he was vindicated. I have some beliefs that sound progressive, some beliefs that sound conservative. I think that any reasonable, balanced human being is going to sound that way. No one side has the final say or the final authority on truth. No one side always has the right answer. When a problem comes along, we are fundamentally faced with one of two options: try something new or stick to our current course. Whichever one of those options we choose, we find out if we did the right thing or the wrong thing. But the other thing we have to remember is that if what we chose turns out to be the wrong thing, it also doesn't guarantee that the other option would have been the right thing. Furthermore, there's no point at which your rightness in history has been finally determined, because history is always being written. The effects of any major cultural shift will be experienced for generations and generations to come. We may not start to see the negative results of those choices for many, many generations. When we are, put it this way, one of the, there's an old Zen proverb where a man has a farm, and he has a horse that he uses to till the soil in his farm. One day the horse escapes, and everyone around him says, "That's terrible." And he says, "We'll see." And one day a new horse wanders onto the farm, and everyone says, "That's great." And he says, "We'll see." But he starts tilling his soil again. And then one day his adult-aged son is riding the horse, falls from it and breaks his arm. Everyone says, "That's terrible." He says, "We'll see." Then one day a person from the local government comes by and says, there's a war has been declared, and all of the able-bodied young men have to go report for the draft to go fight. And and the old man says, "I don't have an able-bodied young man in my home. My son has a broken arm. So because of the broken arm, the son doesn't have to go fight in the war." Everyone around the old man says, "That's great." The man says, "We'll see." That is the reality of life. The balanced perspective is always, "We'll see." I'm no great fan of Game of Thrones. I know that sounds odd considering all of the kind of books I read and everything, but I tried watching the show, couldn't get into it, and on the basis of that, I couldn't bring myself to, I have the first book, I couldn't bring myself to start it because it's a brick, and I already didn't care for the show. But there is that one saying that I really like, which is "winter is coming." And that's a healthy perspective, born out of just the physical, material reality that winter is coming and you have to prepare for it. No matter how good things are in the summertime, winter is always coming, and you always have to be preparing for it. Anyone who comes to you with the idea of, "Don't you want to be on the right side of history?" is living in a delusional fairyland where they think that everything ends with happily ever after. There's no such thing as happily ever after. Whatever choice we take will have a mixture of positives and negatives, and we will always continue to deal with the blowback and the fallout of whatever choice we take, because that's reality. There is no combination of social procedures that can be put in place to ensure utopia for all time, no matter what assholes like Chairman Mao might say. So, no, I don't care to be on the right side of history, because ultimately, there is no guarantee that anything I believe will be on the right side of history, and there's no end to history. What is important is that you remain steadfast in your beliefs. And again, that doesn't mean you don't change them if you realize you are literally in the wrong. But you certainly don't change them simply because somebody is needling you to change them for no reason other than they want you to. There was that horrible movie that was made, The Shape of Water. Now, I normally love Guillermo del Toro. I would probably put Pan's Labyrinth in my top 100 movies. It's an amazing movie. But The Shape of Water was such an asinine idea, and it was asinine at the philosophical level, because water has no shape. It just takes the shape of whatever container it's poured into. And to hold that up as a moral ideal is loathsome in the extreme. The water is not what's important. The rocks are what's important. What holds fast, what's steadfast, what's unshakable, what's unmoving. That's what matters. That's what's virtuous. Being willing to stand up and stand strong for something. That's virtuous. Not being some limp little person that gets buffeted around and just takes the shape of whatever container they're poured into. So that is why when you are asked the question, don't you want to be on the right side of history, your answer should always be no.